I am 100 years old, and if you think that means I have all the answers, you are only half right. What I truly have, what 100 years buys you that nothing else can, is the brutal, unvarnished truth about what happens when you get it wrong. And honey, I got it very, very wrong. I sat in a folding chair at my daughter's kitchen table on the morning of my 72nd birthday, and I cried. Not because I was getting older. I had made peace with that a long time ago. I cried because I had just done the math. 40 years of working, 40 years of punching in before the sun came up, staying late when nobody asked me to, giving everything I had to jobs that gave me a paycheck and nothing more. And when I finally stopped, when I finally put down the apron and the briefcase and the clipboard, I had almost nothing to show for it. A small savings account, a house that needed a new roof, and a Social Security check that barely covered my groceries. I want you to sit with that for a second. 40 years. Gone. Now, before I go any further, I want to ask you one small favor. If this video speaks to you, and I believe with everything in me that it will, please hit that subscribe button right now. Not for me. I am 100 years old. I do not need the followers. Do it for yourself. Because what we talk about on this channel could be the difference between the retirement you have always dreamed of and the one that breaks your heart. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and let's keep going. Because I have a lot to tell you, and I do not intend to waste a single word. I grew up in a small town where people did not talk about money. It was considered rude, ungodly even. You worked hard, you trusted God, and you assumed that if you were a good person who put in honest hours, the universe would take care of the rest. My mother believed that. Her mother believed that. And I believed it too, for far longer than I should have. My name is not important. What is important is that I was a woman who worked for 4 decades, in a factory in my 20s, in a school cafeteria in my 30s, as a home health aide through most of my 40s and 50s, and I retired at 67 with less than $14,000 saved. $14,000 after 40 years of labor, after raising 3 children, burying a husband, surviving 2 recessions, and working through more pain than I can describe in a single sitting. I did not retire poor because I was lazy. I did not retire poor because I was careless. I retired poor because nobody ever taught me the rules of the game I was playing. And by the time I figured out those rules, I was already in my late 60s with my best earning years behind me. That is the first thing I want you to understand, and it is the foundation of everything else I am going to say today. Poverty in retirement is not always a punishment for bad behavior. Sometimes, most of the time in my experience, it is the result of financial ignorance that nobody bothered to correct. We live in a world where they teach children about Christopher Columbus and the Pythagorean theorem, but nobody sits a young girl down and says, "Here is how compound interest works. Here is what happens if you start saving $20 a week at 22 versus 42. Here is the difference between those two choices, written out in real numbers for you to see with your own eyes." Nobody did that for me. I am doing it for you now. The first mistake I made, the one that cost me more than any other, was believing that saving and investing were the same thing. They are not. They are not even close to the same thing. For most of my working life, I put whatever small amount I could scrape together into a savings account at my local bank. I watched the balance go up slowly. I felt proud of it. I thought I was being responsible, and in one sense, I was. But in the sense that actually mattered, I was standing still while the rest of the world moved forward without me. A savings account, in those days and in these days, earns you almost nothing. When I was in my 40s, the interest rate on my savings account was somewhere around 2%. Inflation, during that same period, was often running at 3, 4, sometimes 5%. Do you understand what that means? It means that every single year, while I was saving my money was actually losing value. I was putting coins in a bucket with a hole in the bottom and feeling good about the sound they made when they landed. Investing is entirely different. Investing means putting your money to work in assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, index funds that grow at a rate that outpaces inflation over time. The stock market, over the long run, has historically returned somewhere between 7 and 10% per year when you account for dividends and growth. 7 to 10%. Compare that to 2% in a savings account, and you start to see the gap I am talking about. Here is the number that haunts me the most, even now at 100 years old. If I had taken just $50 a month, $50, the cost of a few dinners out, and invested it in a basic index fund starting at age 25, by the time I was 65, I would have had somewhere in the neighborhood of $260,000. Not because I was rich, not because I had some secret advantage, simply because of compound interest working over time. Instead, I put that $50 in a savings account, watched it earn pennies, and ended up with a fraction of what I could have had. That is the cruelest part of financial ignorance. The mistakes you make in your 20s and 30s do not look like mistakes at the time. They look like ordinary, reasonable decisions. The cost only becomes visible decades later, when you are sitting at your daughter's kitchen table doing math you do not want to do. The second thing I did wrong in this chapter of my life was that I treated every financial setback as a reason to start over from zero. And there were many setbacks. My husband got sick when I was 38, and we spent through nearly everything we had on his medical bills. When he passed, I was 41, I had 3 children still at home, and I had almost nothing saved. So I did what felt logical. I started over. I opened a new savings account. I put in what I could. I told myself I was rebuilding, but I never thought about the cost of stopping. I never thought about the years of compounding I had lost. I never made any effort to catch up aggressively, to make up for lost time by saving more, by investing more, by doing something different from what I had always done. I just went back to the same strategy that had already failed me, with the same slow and steady approach that was never going to be enough. If you have experienced a financial setback, and most of you have, because life is not gentle, please hear me when I say this. You cannot afford to simply start over. You have to start over and accelerate. You have to do more than you were doing before because you have less time than you had before. The math does not care about your circumstances. It only cares about the numbers and the years you have left. By the time I reached my 50s, I had started to sense that something was wrong. Not in a clear, articulate way, more like a low hum of worry that I could never quite silence. I would hear people at work talking about their 401k plans, about their investments, about their retirement accounts, and I would nod along like I understood, and then I would go home and feel a cold kind of fear that I did not know what to do with. The problem was that I was embarrassed. I was in my 50s. I had worked my whole adult life, and I did not understand the basics of personal finance. Admitting that felt like admitting I had failed at something fundamental. So instead of asking questions, I stayed quiet. Instead of seeking out a financial advisor or reading a book or doing anything concrete to educate myself, I kept doing what I had always done and hoped that things would somehow work out. They did not work out. This is the second enormous mistake I made, and I want to address it directly because I know that many of you watching this are in the same position I was. You are 40, 50, 60 years old, and you are embarrassed about what you do not know. You think that everyone else around you has it figured out, and you are the only one who is lost. I am here to tell you, from a century of living, that this is almost never true. Most people are confused about money. Most people are scared about retirement. Most people are quietly doing the same inadequate things I was doing and telling themselves it will be fine. The difference between the people who end up okay and the people who end up at a kitchen table crying is not intelligence or even income. It is whether they were willing to face their fear and get educated. It is whether they were willing to say out loud, "I do not understand this, and I need help." That sentence, right there, is one of the most powerful things a person can say with their money. And I could not make myself say it until it was far too late to make a real difference. In my 50s, I also made a mistake that I see repeated constantly in every generation, and that is allowing lifestyle to expand as income grows. When I started working in the cafeteria, I made very little. When I transitioned to home health care, I made a bit more. And each time my income went up, my spending went up with it. Not dramatically, not irresponsibly by most people's standards. A slightly nicer apartment, a newer car, helping the kids more, small things that felt completely justifiable in the moment. But each of those small things was money that did not go toward my future. Each of those small upgrades was a choice I was making, even if it did not feel like a choice. Financial experts call this lifestyle creep. I call it the slow leak, because it happens so gradually that you never see it clearly. You never sit down and say, "I am choosing to spend my raise on a nicer car instead of investing it." You just buy the car and feel good about it and keep moving. But over 20 years, over 30 years, the compounded effect of all those small leaks is staggering. It is the difference between retiring comfortably and retiring with $14,000. The most painful part of all of this, looking back from where I sit now, is not the money itself. It is what the money represents. Security, independence, choices. When you retire without adequate savings, your choices disappear. You cannot travel. You cannot help your grandchildren. You cannot afford to get sick. You live on a fixed income in a world where everything costs more every year, and you learn a very specific and very humbling kind of fear, the fear of running out. And that fear, I can tell you from experience, does not get easier with time. It gets heavier. I did not tell you all of this to make you despair. I told you this because I believe, with everything in me, that knowledge is the only thing that separates the future you want from the future I got. And I still had choices, even at 70, even at 75. They were harder choices with smaller margins, but they existed. And the reason I want to talk about what I eventually did right is because I do not want anyone watching this to feel like it is too late. It is not too late, but you have to start today, not next month, not after the holidays, not when things settle down. Today. After that morning at my daughter's table, I did something I had never done in my entire life. I called a nonprofit financial counseling service. There are free ones. I did not know that, but there are. And I made an appointment. I sat across from a young woman who was younger than my grandchildren, and I told her everything. The savings account with $14,000, the Social Security check, the house, all of it. And instead of judging me, she simply started working with what was there. The first thing she told me changed the way I saw everything. She said, "The goal now is not to build wealth. The goal is to protect what you have and make it last as long as you do." I had never heard money framed that way. I had always thought of financial planning as something you did to get more. But at 72, the most important thing was making sure that what I had did not disappear before I did. She helped me understand that my house, which I had always seen as just a place to live, was actually an asset I had equity in. She helped me understand the options available for someone in my position, including ways to supplement my income that I had never considered. She helped me create a budget, a real budget, not just a vague sense of what I spent. And for the first time in my life, I could see, clearly and on paper, exactly where every dollar was going. It was terrifying. And it was the most important thing I ever did with money. The third lesson I want to leave you with, the one that sits at the heart of everything, is this. The single greatest financial mistake of my life was not any specific decision about savings accounts or spending. It was the assumption that someone else was watching out for me, that my employer would take care of me, that the government would take care of me, that things would just somehow work out because I was working hard and being decent and doing my part. Nobody was watching out for me. Not because people were cruel, but because that is not how the system works. The system is built for people who understand it, and the people who built it assumed, somewhere along the way, that everyone would figure it out for themselves. You have to be your own advocate. You have to ask the questions, even when they embarrass you. You have to learn the language of money, even if it feels foreign and uncomfortable. You have to look at your retirement account. And if you do not have one, You have to open one today, even if you can only put in $20. And you have to take it seriously, not someday, now. I am 100 years old. I have buried a husband and watched my children grow old. I have seen more change in this world than most people can imagine. And if I could go back, if some miracle allowed me to sit across from my 25-year-old self and say one thing, I would not tell her to work harder. She worked hard enough. I would tell her to learn, to ask, to stop being embarrassed about what she did not know and start being hungry to find out. I would put a pen in her hand and a piece of paper in front of her, and I would make her write down one question. What is compound interest, and what does it mean for my life? Because that question, answered early enough, changes everything. Do not be me at 72, sitting at a kitchen table crying over numbers you cannot change. Be the person who watches a video like this one, feels something shift inside them, and decides to do something different. Be the person who subscribes to this channel and comes back next week and the week after, building the financial education that nobody ever gave them as a child. I worked 40 years and retired with almost nothing. And then I spent the last 28 years of my life learning everything I wish I had known at the beginning. I am sharing it with you now because I do not want another person, not a single one of you, to sit at that kitchen table the way I did. You still have time. Use it.